saying that it feels right.
What's up troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and I'm here today with a brand new video, which is actually technically the formal debut of a brand new series. Now, I released a couple of videos on the Harlem Hellfighters, the Red Baron, and the Lawrence of Arabia in anticipation of the Battlefield 1 reveal. These videos seem to go down really well with you guys, and quite frankly I enjoyed making them at the time as well. So what I've decided to do is make this into a full-blown series. So rather than calling these lore videos or history videos, I've decided to call it Tales from the Battlefield, and this series is going to run all the way up until Battlefield 1's release, and then of course it's going to run into Battlefield 1's release as we start seeing sort of individual characteristics of the game being shown off, and certain details here and there about where we're going to be battling, what kind of guns and weapons we're going to be using, and just the overall details of the game. So I thought I'd start this series off strong today with an interesting fact about the Great War, or World War I, which is chemical warfare and the introduction of it into World War I. So today we're going to look at the individual battles of which chemical weapons were first introduced, and then we're actually going to dive into the different types of chemical weapons and some of the casualties and statistics that this actually brought up from World War I. Prior to World War I, chemical weapons were considered very much uncivilized, but they were only introduced into this war due to the necessity of armed warfare in trenches not getting far enough. There was no way to physically push troops away from trenches other than shelling, and often in this period, shelling was incredibly inaccurate and didn't have a very high impact rate. Now, although it was popularly believed that the German army were the first people to deploy poison gas, in actuality the first instances of chemical warfare rose in August 1914 from the French, who used a gas called Xyl bromide against the Germans. Nevertheless though, it was actually the Germans who did give the first serious study to the development of chemical weapons and the first use of it on a massive scale, unlike the French who used it on a much smaller scale. The first actual breakthrough of chemical weapon usage on a massive scale happened to the west of Warsaw. General Max Hoffmann of Germany's 9th Army was expecting a bird's eye view of what he believed to be a new chapter in warfare, and on the 31st of January 1915 he witnessed the first ever major gas attack in history. General Hoffmann watched as 18,000 gas shells rained down on Russian lines, each one filled with the chemical Xyl bromide, an early form of tear gas. But in actuality, the results from this were very disappointing. He actually is quoted as saying, "I had expected much greater results from the employment of this ammunition, in, as we then imagined, such large quantities, that the chief effect of the gas was destroyed by great cold, which was not known at the time." So the first actual mass usage of a gas weapon or any kind of chemical weapon in general was actually disappointing due to the fact that it was cold, which meant that the air was very much settled and there was very little wind to carry this chemical into the enemy infantry. Now, the problem with this is that Xyl bromide, as mentioned, is actually a very light form of tear gas, and in actuality it only caused sneezing fits in infantry at the time and didn't have the desired effect of being a real chemical weapon that would cause death or casualties of a large scale. The failure in the east of Warsaw though was actually just a temporary setback in what would be the biggest amounting use of chemical weapons in any warfare ever seen, which is why the Great War is so closely associated with chemical weaponry. As the Germans began to realise that chemical weapons could be a way of effectively taking out infantry and pushing them away from trenches, they amped up production values of the gas. Now at the time, the use of Xyl bromide, which didn't actually prompt very much of a reaction from the French, was very much underestimated, so the Allies themselves had not actually begun production of mass-scale weaponry for chemicals. The debut of the first poison gas on a mass scale came just 3 months after the first use of mass chemical weaponry on April 22nd, 1915 at the Second Battle of Ypres. At this stage of the war, Ypres was very well defended by the British, French and Canadians, which had a 10-mile span and bulged into the German occupation territory by 5 miles also. It was a combination of French territorials, Algerian troops on the left side of it, and on the right and centre side British and Canadian troops. On the morning of the 22nd of April, the Germans poured a heavy bombardment into Ypres, and the line fell silent as the afternoon grew. But towards the evening, the bombardment began again, but this time the sentries of the Algerians and French troops noticed a yellow-green cloud drifting towards their way. Puzzled but suspicious, the French suspected that the cloud was masking a German advance by infantry and ordered their men to stand still and mount the trench fire step in readiness for a probable attack. Now, the cloud didn't actually mask an infantry attack, not yet at least. It in fact signalled the first ever use of chlorine gas in World War I. The use of gas should not have been a surprise to the Allied troops, because captured German soldiers had in fact revealed the imminent use of gas on the Western Front, but their warnings were not passed on to higher command. Now, the effects of chlorine gas we're going to go into a little bit later, but essentially this thing can absolutely destroy your respiratory organs and pretty much make you suffocate. Now, panic-stricken, the French and Algerian troops fled in disorder, and they actually created a 4-mile gap in the Allied line. Now, had the Germans actually been prepared for this, they could have potentially made a decisive breakthrough on the Western Front. But in actuality, the experiment was more of a surprise to the German high command as a surprise to the enemy. They didn't actually expect this to be that effective. The use of gas was widely condemned when this first operation took place, and it damaged their powers with relations such as the United States, who were considered neutral at the time. Now, bearing in mind, World War I was not a black and white kind of war. It was incredibly intricate and there were no clear bad guys. So as a result, using gas attacks was a severely bad idea in terms of the national and international interpretation of Germany. In actuality, these gas attacks were placed to a rapid propaganda campaign by the British, who planned to respond with gas attacks themselves, but in the meantime used it as a way to rally support for their cause of the war. It's also worth noting at this period in time there is no such thing as a war crime. There are no laws surrounding rules of engagement or how things should be conducted, and in actuality that comes at the end of World War I through the League of Nations established by the Allies. The attack had one clear benefit to the Allies, however. It brought an end to German hesitancy and disagreement over the use of gas, and finally the cat was out of the bag and the use of gas continued to escalate for the remainder of the war. Once the Allies had recovered from the initial shock of the Germans' practical application of poison gas warfare, a determination existed to exact retaliatory revenge at the earliest possible opportunity, and the British were the first to respond. Now, they raised many gas companies in the wake of the Germans' April attack, and as a result, they were given the orders to prepare for a gas attack at Los in September 1915. This attack backfired, as in some areas wind forced the gas back onto the British troops who were using it, and it marked the beginning of gas escalation across all factions during World War I, and the introduction of the first gas mask as well. So just to finish off, we're going to go through the types of gases and the fatalities. So the first one is tear gas. Now, tear gas is actually an irritant, and it causes the mucous membranes in the eyes, mouth, throat and lungs, and it actually leads to crying, coughing, breathing difficulties and even temporary blindness. And it was first used in August 1914 when French forces used tear gas grenades against the German army. Now, there are estimated no casualties from tear gas because it was used to incapacitate as opposed to kill, and symptoms normally resolved in 30 minutes. However, there was one strange folktale of a man who threw a gas grenade that actually assassinated a leading figure of the German army, but nobody really knows if that's true. Next up is chlorine, and chlorine is a yellow gas with a strong bleach-like odour, and as you guys may know, it's used in swimming pools today. Soldiers described it as a smell of distinct mix of pepper and pineapple. Now, chlorine reacts with water in the lungs and forms hydrochloric acid, which causes coughing and vomiting and irritation to the eyes in low concentrations. In rapid concentrations, it can cause death at concentrations of 1,000 parts per million. And essentially what would happen is that acid would form in your respiratory organs, completely destroying them, including your heart, lungs, your stomach, and pretty much anything that shouldn't have acid in it. And as a result, you would die because the mucus inside it would get completely destroyed. And this was first used in April 1915, and it was also used again in September at Los in 1915 by the British, and it is estimated at Ypres that the casualties went above 1,100, as it was devastating initially, but due to the fact that gas masks were later produced, the effectiveness of it was incredibly limited. Speaking of gas masks, something quite funny as I kind of started making this video came to mind, is I really feel sorry for the poor bastards who had to actually develop these gas masks and probably gas themselves with tear gas and every other kind of gas possible in order to work out if it actually worked. And I imagine that wasn't exactly the most preferable experience. Next up is phosphine and diphosphine, and phosphine is a colourless gas with a musty odour that is compared to mown grass or hay. Diphosphine is a colourless oily liquid, and it reacts with proteins in the lung alveoli, causing suffocation, coughing, difficulty breathing, and irritation to the throat and eyes. It can cause delayed effects not evident for 48 hours, including fluid in the lungs and eventual death. It was first used in December 1915 when German forces used phosphine against the British at Ypres. It's estimated that 85% of all gas-related fatalities in World War I resulted from phosphine and diphosphine, which were both used to fire in artillery shells and cause the most possible damage when shelling the opponents. Finally, there is mustard gas. A mustard gas is a colourless, odourless liquid, but it's used in a chemical agent in impure form. These are yellow-brown in colour and have the odour resembling garlic or horseradish. It's a powerful irritant, and it causes blistering as well that can damage the eyes, skin, and respiratory tract. It causes chemical burns on contact with skin. Forms of mustard gas actually interact with DNA, leading to cell death as well. It was first used on the 12th of July 1917 as German forces used mustard gas again against the British at Ypres. It's estimated the mustard gas caused 2 to 3% of the casualties during World War I, but the actual effects of it were quite low because its effects were debilitating and the patients required elaborate care, but this could be done over time. However, mustard gas can lead to eventual death as it decays the scaled cells more and more. So that's it for today's Tales from the Battlefield. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I'm really enjoying creating this series thus far, and you guys seem to be quite enjoying some of the videos behind it too. Now, if you've liked this, make sure you put a like down below or a comment just to let yourself be known, or reach out on social media and let me know what you think of the series. And I'd also like anybody who has any interesting statistics or facts to list them down in the comments section. It would be greatly appreciated, as I don't always pick up on every exact fact in these videos, and of course I do encourage you to read around as well. And if any of you have any interesting stories that you want me to pick up on and read about and potentially make videos on, please leave that in the comment section or tweet it to me or just get in touch in general, and I would be interested in learning about some of these stories and potentially making as many videos as possible, as the moment I'm just kind of like brainstorming video ideas. So that's about it for today. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon in another video.